Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Matt. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
Mark, I am doing great. Bourbon Lifers, I am doing really great. This is the last day of a 3-day weekend here. We are wrapping up Memorial Day, and today would be Monday of Memorial Day. So always a good time to have the extra day off work, and the sun especially came out this weekend here in central to Kentucky. It was a little toasty, but hey, there are worse things that could be happening right now. So I'm doing well. How are you doing, Mark?
You know what? Other than the fact that last week when we did this, it was like 56 degrees. And this week when we're doing it, it's 88 degrees. I don't know what the hell's going on with the weather here in Kentucky, but man, I'm just about fed up with it. You know, I like a spring where you can kind of gradually, get into that summer temperature, but man, we went straight from like almost winter temperatures up to midsummer. So I'm hoping we can balance out sometime this week and get back down into the 70s and enjoy it a little bit, before it gets crazy hot here. But other than that, Matt, I'm doing pretty good. So
great.
And we're remote tonight again as well. Still, well, you and I are together, but our guest is remote. We're still respecting the social distancing as much as we can. So keeping ourselves as safe as we possibly can as well, and our guest also. So, before we jump into everything tonight, I want to thank our sponsors. And of course, we have the Stave Restaurant out in Millville, Kentucky. We love what they're doing out there. Rebecca and her husband and Chef Jonathan just making some great food. We love visiting them, and they are just right down the street from a local distillery, actually 2 local distilleries that we're pretty fond of as well. So we love the Stave. So if you get a chance, go out and visit them. And then also Premium Bar Products, a new sponsor that we picked up, and we're happy to be working with them. They provide glassware and barware for consumers. So instead of having to order 72 Glencairns at one time and spending a lot of money, you can work with them. They will actually do some personalized work for you guys. So check them out online, Premium Bar Products, and they got some great stuff, man. So it'd be really good to hook up with them. They got a lot of different glasses, and you'll love what they have to offer. So tonight, special guest, Matt, you want to tell everybody who we've got with us?
You know I do. We are absolutely excited and tickled to have with us co-founder and master taster. Yeah, we are. We're more than tickled. Co-founder, master taster of Pinhook Bourbon, Mr. Sean Joseph. Sean, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Thank you so much. I haven't said it recently, but I'm also tickled to be here.
That's awesome. And you know what? The great thing is we're also tickled tonight. We're tickled pink, and that's going to be the great way to jump into our first. Yeah. Did you like that, Matt?
I'm trying to be smooth. That's
trying to be creative. Every week we get on the show, Matt, and we talk about the technical difficulties that we're having. So tonight, again, we've had some technical difficulties, man. And just remote broadcasting just sucks. I wish everybody could just get in the same room and we can just sit down with mics and drink and have fun. But man, I'm telling you, this long distance podcasting thing is getting to be a pain in the ass. And
I wish we could just get everybody in the same room. Period. Yeah. Just all the listeners. Let's just bring everyone together and do it live.
We do it live.
Get rid of the microphones. Podcast. Have Sean up here, and we can just
go
I have to
it.
say, though,
but anyway,
I have to say, in person or from a distance, I spent 15 years in the restaurant business, which I don't know how much you guys know about the restaurant business or if you've ever been involved with it, but it's a difficult and challenging business, and you're constantly it can be your employees, it could be equipment breaking right before Saturday night service. It can be a table of 10 that says they have a reservation and you have no record of them. You're just constantly up against it, right? Yeah. One of the most challenging things. All of that said, so there's plenty of stress. All of my most stressful moments in restaurants were around audiovisual. Right.
Really? Okay.
So I opened a restaurant in Manhattan called Maysville, named after the port town, which,
Yeah.
one of many stories, but potentially the birthplace of bourbon, because it was an old bourbon county at the time. It's now Mason County. But anyway,
Right.
point being, we had a derby party and we didn't have TVs there. So I thought it would be really cool to project the derby onto a large screen in the restaurant.
Yeah.
I call an AV company that someone recommended, whatever. And I'm like, don't you want to come and check out the setup? And they're like, no, I do this all the time. It'll be fine. He comes in, they try to set up. We have these huge windows. It's like an old historic building. They try to set up in front of the windows. And of course, you can't see the projection.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So then all of a sudden we're like, all right, bro, like, what? Like, and it's like the race is getting close. And he's scrambling around the restaurant trying to figuring out a place to put this giant screen. And then he wasn't able to connect to our cable.
Oh,
no. It's like, it's about to start and he's like propping the thing up against a wall behind these banquettes. And it just like, we did get to watch the race, but I was like, we had, and the place was packed. Like we must have sold like 380 mint juleps and everyone was getting hammered and restless. And then everyone's watching this debacle.
Well, then I don't feel so bad. I don't feel so bad.
Might have been some side betting going on whether or not they were going to get to see the derby.
I think there was. Yeah, we barely pulled it off, but I'm terrified of AV.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm an attorney by trade, man. So doing podcasts is just not my thing at all. And this has been over the last 4 months, the learning curve has been kind of ridiculous, but throw the wrench in the gears with the COVID-19 and have to learn how to do all this stuff online. It's just, kind of crazy, but back to being tickled pink, because I'm still tickled pink tonight. And I guess this really, I don't know, this is more of a purple, isn't it? So
we say magenta, but
magenta. There you go.
I don't quibble. Whatever anyone calls it is good by me.
I got you. It's the blend between a pink and a purple. Yeah. So, but our first drink tonight that we're going to be jumping into, man, and I'll tell you, Sean, I'm excited about this one. Matt, I know you are too. Mm-hmm. And I know when this was released, there's a lot of people super excited about this one, but this is the new Bohemian Bourbon. And it's got the magenta wax on top. And this one, well, Sean, I tell you what, man, I mean, it's your baby. I'll let you tell everybody, if you don't care, just tell everybody what we're dealing with on this one.
Yeah. So this is super exciting for us. It's the first bourbon that, from our proprietary mash bill. So,
right.
I founded the company in 2010. Like many people, we started by sourcing from MGP, which was LDI at the time. And then we were fortunate that it was friends of ours, specifically Will Arvin, but then also Wes Murray, who we came to know, who were the ones that bought the former Old Taylor distillery, which is now Castle and Key. We were the first people they approached.
Nice.
Because they knew that they needed to have contracts. We were friends with them. Pinhook, we're still a very small company, but at the time we were teeny. But because of the connection to thoroughbred horse racing, we had a little bit, I think, of cachet in Kentucky specifically. So it just seemed like a good fit. But you have to understand that when they approached us, there was no master distiller. It was just the two of them. Like they had done some of the basic clearing of the property. And they're basically proposing to us, would you like to make bourbon here? And we're like, yeah. I mean, we, like many people, had crawled under the fence and had seen this incredible, dilapidated, essentially like rotting, historic distillery. And just even the idea that we had an opportunity to make bourbon there with the same water source, the original rick houses that were built, or at least one of the original rick houses that was built in 1887. So essentially we said yes to working with them without them having anything completed in the way of hiring a distilling team. Yeah. It was just a faith and a belief that they were going to be able to get it done. And so, fast forward to them hiring a master distiller who was Mary Ann Barnes at the time. At least when we started there, they parted ways. But anyway, I got to sit with Castle and Key and create custom mash bills of bourbon and rye. And so this bourbon is the first bourbon to come out of the Old Taylor distillery in half a century. And so while on the one hand, it's, our proprietary mash bill, meaning I selected the grains, I picked the yeast and all that kind of stuff. I don't know anything about distillation, right? And so that's what contract distilling is. I mean, if you put me
right
at a distillery with all the equipment, I'm no better than anybody else. So pretty exciting that here we are having more of a hand in the product in terms of being able to shape it a little bit, but really relying on their expertise. And then also having, again, this historic place being the site of where it's all happening. And Colonel Taylor picked the site because of the water, and there are 5 springs there, one of which he built a keyhole shaped well around, which he said the water was the key to his whiskey. And this is, as I said, the first bourbon to be released from there. And I think, our mash bills aside, and of course they brought in new stills, to me, it still is, and it's a great story to say it, of course, but I also believe it. It's still, it's those original rick houses. It's that water source. So there are aspects of it in terms of the aging environment and the most important ingredient being water that bring us all the way back to 1887. Yeah,
man, it's an awesome story. I absolutely love what you guys have done. I love Castle and Key. It's a beautiful place.
It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for all of our listeners, if you're not familiar with Castle and Key, you should do a little internet researching, especially to some before and after photos of just the transformation and the reformation of what went through this distillery and the property, and seeing Sean, I think you put it very aptly. You were able to peek underneath the fence and see what it was and what it's become. It's absolutely incredible. The grounds are breathtaking, and everything that they've done, bringing the authenticity of their product and what it was when it was old Colonel Taylor, and the story and the history that they brought into it is really just tremendous. It's outstanding, the effort that went into it and the finished results. So if our listeners aren't familiar, check that out.
Yeah, and Will's an attorney too, right? So there's hope for me. There's hope for me. Hope for me yet. I know I think he's down in Nicholasville, if I remember correctly. I don't know Will, but
great guy.
I've been an attorney for 25 years, man. So I know of Will and know about Will. So when he decided to get into this, I was like, that's crazy, but that's beautiful. So I was really happy for him, and they've done a great job out there. So this particular bourbon, this is yours.
This is ours.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're looking at, let's see, this is a high proof. Let's see, 114.5 on the proof on this one, right?
Yep.
So,
so it's 75% corn, 15% rye, 10% barley, which I consider, at least as I mentioned, I was open these bourbon restaurants, and I used to break up the list by, kind of stylistically. And this is what I would have called traditional mash bill bourbon.
Yeah.
So, you have some people, it's a little higher barley than you're used to seeing, but this kind of 75% corn, and then the remaining 25% being split up between rye and barley is pretty typical. And I think we'll obviously get to the rye, which is a very unique mash bill. But one thing that we try to do with Pinhook is, I was just always interested, like I see myself more as like a classicist, like there are plenty of people doing single malts and playing around with, barrel aging and finishes and all this kind of stuff, which is very cool. But I was very interested in a way in more kind of classic bourbon. And to me, this is the classic bourbon mash bill. It reminds me when I first opened my bourbon bar in 2008, and people would come in. This was, of course, 2008 was before the boom had really happened, and someone who was just kind of curious about whiskey, be like, well, what should I try? Like, what do you think? Like, I want to taste the bourbon that's what bourbon's all about. And so often I would give them Rock Hill Farm or Elmer T. Lee, because those were very accessible, affordable at the time. I could order them, every week. I could order them every week from my distillery, and they represent that great, sweet, candied kind of profile that is, to me, like quintessential bourbon. And as I was saying to someone the other day, if you think about the reason why people that like Scotch hate bourbon, it's because of the sweetness, right? They find it too overwhelmingly sweet. But I think if you like bourbon in a way, like that is the profile. And so I think that this, and again, it's only 34 months old, the average age of the barrels. I really like the way it's showing for the age. And it'll be fun to see where it goes, but I think it's already showing a ton of sweetness, especially at the proof. It's already got a lot of that butterscotch, and those candied notes. A friend of mine who I really enjoy his tasting notes, he was like, man, it tastes like Frosted Flakes, right?
Frosted Flakes.
Because he's like, if you think about it, it's young enough that you still get grain, although I don't think
the grain.
You get the grain. And to me, I think, things can taste youthful without tasting young, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you get youthful notes, but it doesn't mean it tastes raw. I don't think it tastes raw, but you definitely taste grain. Right. But there's a lot of sweetness there, which is why I think he got his Frosted Flakes note. Yeah,
I can see that. Matt, what are you picking up over there? I see you smiling.
The sweetness was one of the first things that really struck me on it, on the nose especially. I got a lot of caramel corn.
Yeah.
At first, like it was very, very much caramel corn, very distinctly. I had the memory, the smell, the taste, everything about it. And then after it sat a little bit, it's getting sweeter, and I'm getting like more fruit, more apricot.
Yeah, it's super. I think it's apricot-y, and to me, it's also the fruit's kind of tropical as well. And that's what's cool about it too. And I always would say to people, on the one hand, like, take it with a grain of salt when someone who's trying to sell you young bourbon is telling you how great young bourbon is. But I've really, because I'm around it a lot, I've come to appreciate the fact some of these notes, it would be easy to say on the one hand, I can't wait till this is 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
I can't wait to see that maturity and development. But the flip side of it is some of those notes, like the candied corn and more of that fruit, they do dissipate because as the barrel starts to impart more flavor, more tannin, and you start transitioning into more of the tobacco and the leather and more of the spice, and then the fruit over time starts to become more dried fruit as opposed to fresh fruit, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the sort of flavor arc. And so I kind of appreciate the fact that, some of the things that we enjoy about this now will never be like that again. And so appreciate that aspect of it and enjoy it. Don't just say like, oh, this is cool, but it'll be better when it's 2 years down the road,
Well, now from what I understand, that's kind of the philosophy when you guys started, because you're sourcing barrels,
Yep.
and you were blending, and you weren't really looking to create the similar profile bottle after bottle.
Correct.
Go ahead. Can you tell us a little bit about what the process was, what the thought process behind that was?
Yeah. So it was kind of twofold. One, I started in the wine business first. I mean, I started working in restaurants and I worked my way up, and I'm a certified sommelier from the Court of Master Sommeliers. I have my sommelier certificate from the American Sommelier Association. So I spent a lot of time around wine and doing all the deductive tasting and blind tasting and taking my exams and anyway, doing all that stuff. And going back to 2008, when I opened my whiskey bar, I don't know how much you guys remember about the universe of American whiskey back then, but it was incredibly narrow. So the idea of doing all these single barrel picks was not a thing yet. There was only one expression of Maker's Mark, other than like some black wax they would do for the Japanese market. There's one Woodford, there's one Knob Creek, there's one Basil Hayden. People weren't playing around with barrel finishes. And so I thought that there was an opportunity to take a different approach and just do something that was unique. And because I had the wine background, in the wine business, at least when you're talking about quality, everything is based around making the best of a given vintage, right? There is no, this Pinot Noir from this producer has this flavor profile. It's every year I make the best Pinot Noir I can. And we all understand that the weather affects the grapes, right?
Right.
And you make the best wine you can. And so what intrigued me is I started to understand, and again, back then there wasn't a lot of talk about this. There's so much barrel variation, And there are a lot of variables, right? It's one tree makes one barrel. No two trees are the same. The grain is different. The grain in the wood is different, but then also it's grain harvests. You can't distill every batch identical. There's the weather that year and house position, right? But the bottom line is you have a ton of variability. And so the simple idea was this: what if instead of, and frankly, it's still the majority of the whiskey business, the American whiskey business, instead of taking these variable ingredients and trying to figure out how to blend them so each batch tastes identical, same flavor profile at the same proof, what if you simply tried to make the best whiskey, not the same whiskey? But in doing that, you run the risk of, well, 1 year, even let's say it's even same mash bill, same source, same age, but because of the variability, 1 year you have a release that tastes more fruit forward and it has a certain profile and it's 98.5 proof, and then the next year you end up with something that's more spice driven at 94.5 proof, but they're still both Pinhook bourbon. And you run the risk with the consumer of saying like, well, I like the last one, but the new one tastes different. I'm not so sure how I feel about the new one. But that really is the overall ethos, is celebrating the natural variability and then just trying to assemble whichever barrels we have are mature, pick the ones we think would work best together and put out a vintage, which then is a one-time only thing that will never exist again.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's obviously great concept. It's worked well for you guys. Mm-hmm. People go nuts, especially with this one that just came out and the other one that we're going to try here in a minute. I know there's been so much chatter on social media about both of these. But man, I'm telling you, I like it. 114.5 proof. It's not hot like a higher proof bourbon. It's got that sweetness to it. But man, the finish on this one just goes on and on and on. It seems like to me, I keep getting that feeling in my mouth that it's coated it well. It's a nice warmth that I keep coming back to. So I really like this. This is a great bourbon. 34 months.
Yeah, and one thing about it too is, so the idea of the proofing, which was something that I didn't discover it in the grand sense, but I discovered it for myself through tasting, was how much proof affects the flavor profile. Mm-hmm. So even once we'll assemble it and we're happy with the blend, but then you'll taste the blend at a bunch of different proofs, let's say 10, sometimes 15 different proofs. And there is a proof in there somewhere that we think of as the perfect proof, where it's the most balanced and you have great alcohol integration. Because sometimes, and that's the thing, I don't know what cast strength on this was. It was probably not much higher than this, let's say 116.5. But I tasted it between 105 and cast strength and was looking for that high proof sweet spot. And I guess my point is, not that I would have, but I could have picked a proof that you guys would have thought was hot and maybe didn't have a long finish, even though the blend was already good. Right. There is a perfect sweet spot in there that delivers the best result. And so that's another unique aspect of what we do, is kind of, we release an everyday bourbon and rye. We're going to taste the rye, and those are proofed, on the lower side, let's say between 90 and 100. And then the high proof is, 105 to wherever cast strength is going to be, but ends up being closer to cast strength.
It's awesome. I really enjoy that one for sure. And we're actually already at the end of our first segment, Sean, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
That was fast. That was like fast. We're like 24 minutes in already. I'm like, how did that happen, man? So, Matt, we'll close this segment out and we'll take a quick break. But what are your thoughts on the Bohemian, man?
I think it's really great. I believe that the age statement doesn't mean anything. This is a great bourbon. You could tell me it was however youthful or old, and it's still going to be a really great bourbon. I think this is an excellent choice. And Sean, to what you were saying, sometimes when you get an older bourbon and you lose a lot of those youthful notes, the tropical fruit and some of that sweetness where you pick up the oak and just a lot of char and more barrel, I think this drinks with a really fun flavor profile, and I think it's really good. It's not overly. The flavors aren't overpowering in any direction. It's very well balanced, like you were saying. It drinks really well. I think this is a very, very good bourbon.
Yeah, definitely agree with that, Matt.
Thank
No doubt about it, Sean.
Thank you,
Hey, Sean, great job, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I tell you what, let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsor, and then we'll come back for round two. So everybody out there in Bourbon Life land, you guys just hold on with us for a minute or two. We're going to hear a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with more with Sean Joseph. So thanks a lot, and just hold on. Hey, when you're out hunting for those hard-to-find bottles or just enjoying the distilleries of Central Kentucky, you're going to work up an appetite. And when it's time to refuel, we suggest that you visit our good friends Rebecca and Eric Burnworth at the Stave Restaurant. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, close to Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, the Stave Restaurant is just off the beaten path, nestled on the banks of Glens Creek. Chef Jonathan Sanning prepares amazing food each day, featuring an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. You can take our word for it. The food alone is worth the trip to the Stave. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. And you can even purchase bottles of bourbon to take home with you while you're there. Make sure to follow the Stave on Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky to stay up to date on everything that's going on. The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. All right, everybody, welcome back for round two of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Mark, as always, front and center. All right, maybe off to the side with my co-host, Matt. What's up, Matt?
Hey, not much. How are you doing, Mark? We are back for round two of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Thanks, everybody, for coming back for round two. We hope you poured yourself another one and are ready for some great conversation, because we have with us the co-founder and master taster of Pinhook Bourbon, Sean Josephs, joining us in the Bourbon Life studio. Well, not in the Bourbon Life studios, but joining us for the Bourbon Life
remotely.
Podcast. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, Sean, we just had our first round, which was the Bohemian Bourbon. And that is your magenta wax, which you were saying is your high proof bourbon.
Yep.
And each time that's released, it's an annual release, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So each year it will be a different blend of bourbon. So this year's Bohemian Bourbon won't be the same as last year's, won't be the same as next year's. So have you gotten any pushback for that? And how do you go about your blending process? So, because you've got so much coming from different barrels, and if you're pulling from this huge stock, how do you know if you've got too much going in, not enough going in? Is there a flavor profile that you try to stick within for all the blending, and where does it fit in for you and for the end product? Do you let the barrels pick the product, or is there a flavor profile and a taste or some sort of a characteristic that you're seeking out for the end product and you search for those barrels?
It's a great question. So the way I think about it, and I think is where the wine thing comes into play for me. And I always make it clear to people that I would say I never learned how to taste bourbon. And what I mean by that is I've never worked at a distillery. I've never gone through a distillery sensory training. I was just someone who worked in restaurants, was constantly tasting food, was a sommelier, was constantly tasting wine, was doing blind tastings. And so I'd say I developed confidence in my palate. And then I really fell in love with bourbon, which led me to open a bourbon restaurant. But nowhere along the way did I come to understand how distilleries approach or think about their product. Mm-hmm. And so naturally, because my background was wine, I thought about it like wine. And the way you think about wine is aromatic complexity on the palate, balance, length of finish, texture or mouthfeel, and alcohol integration, right? Those are the qualities you're looking for. And if you think about those qualities, they're agnostic with respect to flavor profile, right? Because as we were sort of talking about before, you could capture all of that in something that was spice driven, in something that was wood driven, in something that was fruit driven. It could be any number of those things. It doesn't have to be any one thing. It's about the overall qualities. So I would like to think that if someone came to like Pinhook Bourbon, they could count on the fact that it's balanced. They could count on the fact that it has a good finish. They could count on the fact that it was, that it's not hot, right? It's alcohol integration, all of those types of things. And so because of that, there is no, other than achieving those qualities and using that as a benchmark, there is no, you don't go into it saying it's going to taste like this. It's like, let's taste. So let's say, for example, we're doing a blend and the total production is going to be 150 barrels. We might pull 220 barrels, taste the majority of those barrels, and then put the barrels into what we call pods, meaning break them up into groups where you're pouring equal amounts of 10 to 12 barrels into one sample bottle. And so now you know what that group tastes like. And then you're kind of going through all the pods and saying like, how's this pod? How's that pod? You want each pod in and of itself to have good qualities. And if you have a pod that's really not working, you can go back to your tasting notes and say, oh, I see why this one's problematic because it has 2 barrels in it that I identified as really hot. What if I move one of them to another pod that's really sweet and I think it can handle a barrel with a little more assertiveness or astringency, and meanwhile pop one of those out of there or maybe grab a barrel from somewhere else? Then you're playing around with all of these different combinations of pods. But again, the sum of the pods is more barrels than you need for the blend. So you're really just keep playing around with different combinations until you find something great. And I've seen examples. So we had a release, this was with MGP whiskey actually, but a high proof or our cast strength rye. We were doing cast strength before, and we pulled 120 barrels. We whittled it down to 90. And then we produced 5 different 65 barrel blends from the 90, meaning that all 5 obviously had a decent amount of overlap, but none of the 5 were the same. I narrowed it down to 2 that I thought were far and away the best of the 5. And one of them was much kind of darker in style, and one was much more citrusy in style. And they were both really, really good. They were just 2 different things. And I just think in the end, I thought that the one that was kind of darker met more of the criteria that I said in terms of complexity and length of finish and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where we ended up. But it just as easily in a way could have been something more citrus driven and brighter. So I think in a way, we're being guided more by the barrels than we are, we have an ethos and a philosophy of the result we want, but we're letting the barrels guide it. We're not saying like, hey, we need to produce a rye that's like this. It's just, let's make the most delicious whiskey we can with the barrels that we have. And they're going to show us where to go as long as we take the time to taste through them and play around with all the different combinations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes good sense. And it kind of leads me to a question. It made me think while you're talking about that. I mean, you're not looking for a specific flavor profile, but with your past experience in wine, do you find that the thought process for you guys at times may be, yes, there are dedicated bourbon drinkers, but there are also wine drinkers out there. There are Scotch drinkers.
Sure.
There's other whiskey drinkers out there that we would like to appeal to as well. I mean, does that drive any of your decision making or thought process or blending, or is it just, hey, we're just going to mix up what we mix up and we want it to taste the best regardless of who it might appeal to?
It's more the latter. I mean, I guess I would say certainly it occurs to me that someone who understands or appreciates wine might, the idea of what we do would make sense to them. Right. But, I think it's like, while it's a cliche, every positive is a negative, every negative is a positive. And so the negative of what we do is that someone might have liked the previous one and they're like, well, what if I like it this time and I don't like the next one? The positive, of course, is someone who's like, I wasn't crazy about the last one, but maybe I should give the next one a try.
Right.
Yeah. And I also think the thing that's so cool, and it's become a little more common in bourbon, but it existed less before when we first thought of this idea, is the idea of, and wine has this ephemeral quality this idea that like I bought a case of 1996 Bordeaux from, this chateau, and I've been drinking it for the last 5 years, and I have one bottle left, and I'll never be able to get it again. And so it's the idea. And of course there's like a marketing, you could say there's like a marketing side, like the collectability thing, but I'm almost more interested in like the emotional connection that you have to a bottle. It's like, man, I really love that 2018 Pinhook Rye. I can't get it anymore. I only have a half a bottle left. Like, I think your relationship to the whiskey is kind of more charged when you're like, you can't just go out and buy another bottle. And if you could get another bottle of Pinhook Rye and it's the 2019 vintage, you know that it won't taste like the 2018. And maybe that's not maybe in your mind, that's both good and bad because you don't think 2019 was as good as 2018. But maybe in 2021, that other one will come along that you're like, man, this might be better than 2018. It's like, and I think as someone who came from wine, that was always this fun conversation around wine that didn't really exist in whiskey. So I kind of like the idea that we've brought that conversation to the world of American whiskey.
No, I think it sounds great, man. And speaking of the whiskey and the ryes, that's what we've moved on to. I don't know that we've mentioned that.
Oh yeah.
But maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but we are drinking the Rye'd On. And this is the new rye. And just, I wanted to go back real quick before we talk about more of this rye. So the magenta bottles, that's the high proof bourbon.
Yep.
Now each year they have different names. Is that right?
Yep.
Though?
So each year, so our partner, Jamie Hill of Bourbon Lane Stable, he's the guy we were hanging out with when we were first checking in on our barrels when we moved them from MGP to Bardstown, Kentucky with Strong Spirits, and we're just spending time in Kentucky and just soaking it all up. So we would hang out with Jamie, and that's kind of, we had this vintage idea, but we didn't know how to express it. And through spending time with Jamie, we understood that there were these parallels between thoroughbred horse racing, one of which I had never heard of pinhooking before. And so he was explaining that it's the big part of his business, buying, weanlings, essentially baby thoroughbreds with the explicit intent of selling them for a profit when they're mature, so someone else will race the horse. Well, as you guys might remember, back then, there was a severe lack of transparency in the world of American whiskey. And it's still that way to some degree. It's become more transparent. When I was a buyer and I owned these whiskey bars, I always thought it was very frustrating because all I cared about was that the whiskey tasted good. And I didn't really like the fact that all these things were being hidden. So we loved the idea of the name Pinhook because we knew we never wanted to own our own distillery. And so we connected this idea that we were pinhooking bourbon, buying baby bourbon based on its lineage, selling it when it was mature. But built into that is this idea of transparency. Like, we're saying that we buy and sell. We're not pretending that we have a distillery. And then Jamie also has a stable called Bourbon Lane Stable. Every horse in the stable has bourbon or rye in the name of the horse. And so, we're not like the smartest people on earth, but it doesn't take much to connect the dots there. And we were like, Jamie, what if, and we saw these parallels, what if we used whichever up and coming thoroughbred in your stable to mark each vintage? And so it's like the whiskey in the bottle is unique. The horse on the label is unique. They're both a one-time only thing. And Jamie picks whichever horse he thinks has the best chance of making it to the Kentucky Derby. That's really the idea. Is he's like, and of course it's the horse business. So it's like, how well is he going to do at that? But that's really his goal. Is he's like, well, I'm really happy with, this horse. So that's the horse that ends up on our label. And then next year, when we do our high proof bourbon, or all the bourbons for a given year are connected to the same horse, and then all the ryes for a year are connected to the same horse.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense. So this is the Rye'd On.
This is Rye'd On,
and this is also very excited about this one because this one also is Castle and Key.
Yep. And so this was the first. So this actually came out before the bourbon, which made it the first whiskey to come out of Old Taylor since it shut down. And interestingly, the way I was saying that for bourbon, I think about sort of this classic bourbon profile. I became really interested when we were blending our MGP that we were getting much different notes out of it than other people, even though we had the same 95.5 rye as everybody. which made me think that rye doesn't have as much of a style as everyone seems to think. And it's more that people blend to a style, because we were putting out some of these ryes that were a little softer and more floral. You know, I think there's a lot of florality in rye, and a lot of fruit, but most people are going for that like aggressive spice because that's
The spice,
the nature of rye. So when I picked my rye mash bill, we went with something that is pretty atypical, which is 60% rye, 20% barley, 20% corn. The high barley, you're seeing a little bit of in the bourbon world now, more on, but the reason you typically didn't see it is because malted barley is the most expensive ingredient. And there's this funny narrative, which I learned over time in the bourbon industry, which is that the reason you have malted barley is for fermentable sugar, for like enzymatic reasons. And it's true, right? It has a lot of sugar and you need the sugar to help with fermentation. But if you think about how complex single malt Scotch is, it's weird to kind of call rye the flavor grain. And of course, we always talk about corn as being, you know, the ultimate, you know, kind of American crop. And then malted barley is kind of just like, oh, we just need that to help with fermentation. And yet, obviously, barley has an incredible amount of complexity. And so this is, I think, a pretty unique mash bill. I actually, when I picked this mash bill, I wasn't aware of anything like it. Turns out that when Old Forester came out with their rye, it's something pretty similar to this. It has high malted barley. But I picked this before that. So I didn't, you know, I thought I was picking something unique, but whatever. That's how these things go. It's still pretty unique. But I think, so this is about 2.5 years old. And I think this is a great example. I think you can really taste the barley. And I think the barley is kind of softening the edges of the rye, and just the fact that it's relatively youthful. So I think it's pretty round. And I think if rye is, you know, historically thought of like the spice in the earth and corn is like the sweet, I think the barley is this more like the umami, like the savory, almost nutty character that I just think is a great added addition. But it definitely doesn't taste. I think what I like about this is I think that if you like American whiskey, you should like this, but it definitely doesn't taste like another rye that you can think of to me.
No, it doesn't. And I've had the Old Forester rye, and it doesn't to me taste like that. Matt, what are you getting on this, man?
You know, that's interesting that you had said it has a very similar mash bill to the Old Forester rye, because we had that rye on one of our previous episodes, and now I'm drawing some similarities in it. But this, to me, when I first smelled it, I got a lot of herbs. I got a lot of dill.
Yeah.
I got almost like lemongrass.
Yeah, it's minty too.
Yeah.
Minty, yeah.
I had like green apple.
Yeah.
What you were saying about the barley mellowing out any sort of a cut or a burn on the taste, I can definitely see that coming through, because it's not an overly aggressive bite on the taste as far as a burn may be concerned. It's rounded. It's very, very well rounded.
It's I love that. Someone said, actually they said it about Bohemian, but I think it would apply to Rye'd On as well, which I loved as a compliment. And I loved it because it's not an adjective I hear a lot. He said, it's really lively. It was someone on Instagram, and it's like, and I think of it's like, you don't think about bourbon and rye as being, and it's a word that is used more in wine. People talk about a wine being energetic.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Just kind of having a lot of like, you know, people even call wine. It's like, there's, I think, some interesting wine terms, like people will call it like kind of nervy, you know, it's just like, it's kind of, you know, it's got energy, it's got life. And I think that, you don't think about whiskey as being fresh, right? Necessarily. Right. That's not really, and I think you're talking about herbs and fresh fruit. It's kind of, it's bright. It's bright.
Saying fresh is a really, really great way to describe this. I wouldn't, I was looking for something to say, and hearing fresh, I think that's a really, really great adjective to put toward this rye. It's really unique.
97 proof too.
97 proof, yeah.
And that's what I like to point out about this stuff too, right? Is this is our everyday rye. Like this is the SRP is $37. The SRP on Bohemian Bourbon is $49. So it was also really important to me that, because I saw bourbon from when it was, Elijah Craig 18 was $48 retail. And I saw it, and it was really important to me that one thing that attracted me to it was how accessible it was compared to wine. And so we really wanted to take an accessible approach and be a value. And of course, there's less expensive whiskey out there. You can't really compete with the efficiencies of the big guys, but we're trying to make it as affordable. And I hope, and again, $37 is hardly a cheap whiskey, but you're not breaking the bank either. And hopefully this can be someone's I see this as an everyday kind of whiskey. And we're talking about it being fresh. Like what a great, people think of bourbon as not being, well, I'm sure you guys don't feel this way, but not being a summer drink. And I think if you were going to drink bourbon in the summer or the spring on a hot day, you kind of want something like this.
This is like you're perfect. I think we were talking off the air a little bit, like firing up the smoker on a hot afternoon. And like the last thing you want is something super heavy and high in proof and with a ton of like wood and tobacco and char. Like you want something crisp and refresh, and this is it. I think you're absolutely right, Sean.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing, Matt. I was like, this is something that even when it is 88 degrees outside in the middle of May, like it is now, you could still sit around and drink this, even drinking it neat. And it's still going to be, it's almost like refreshing. I mean, I don't think I've never had a rye that has like the sweetness to it that this does. I pick up just the sweetness to it. And I really like it. It's, I like the mint. I'm always about mintiness in my ryes, more so even than spiciness. And I love the fact that, the mint's not overpowering, but you still pick it up on the nose, you pick it up on the palate. Man, you get that, just a sweetness as well to this, which rounds it out really nicely. So, this is something you could easily drink.
This would make an amazing mint julep.
God, I was just thinking that, Sean.
But what I would do, I don't think you would have to muddle any mint. I think that you would just put the mint as the garnish, so you get like a nose full of mint. And then I also think it's already so sweet. People often, I find that juleps, it's a great drink that gets ruined for having too much sugar in it. And I think a lot of people will put a half an ounce of simple for 2 ounces. I think you would need maybe an eighth of an ounce of simple for this, maybe a quarter at most, but an eighth of an ounce is 1 bar spoon. So I think if you made this with 1 bar spoon of simple and all you did was just mix a bar spoon of simple with 2 ounces of Rye'd On, and then put your crushed ice in, and then just put the garnish, like the big bouquet of mint.
Yep.
I think that would make a heck of a julep.
There you go, guys. Everyone check the show notes for the recipe on this one.
It's pretty easy. You don't need much.
Well, yeah. It's, man, this is great.
Yeah, Matt's a big fan of juleps, so much so that he named his dog Julep. So, that's the new Bourbon Life bingo. Everybody playing Bourbon Life bingo at home.
That's right. My dog came up.
We got to mention Matt's dog Julep. And man, we're at the end of round 2 already on this one. Daggone. I don't know if you guys noticed. Nobody at home obviously can, or people listening to this can't see me, but I popped the cork off of this bottle 3 different times while we're talking already. Just because I poured a short pour just to get a taste of it, and then I was like, "What? I need a little more of that." And then I was like, "Wait, I need a little bit more of that." So
it's interesting. I'm seeing I obviously follow all this stuff on Instagram and whatnot, and I'm definitely seeing where people are like, they understand that, like on the one hand, they're like, "Oh, this is really delicious," which is to me the most important thing, because I don't think challenging people's palates means someone questioning whether it tastes good, right? Like delicious is delicious, and there's no faking that. But then people are also kind of like, I can't, like someone said about Bohemian, they're like, I really can't compare it to anything. They're like, it's really good. I really like it. Doesn't remind me of anything. I think that's pretty cool. And hopefully that's, maybe speaks to this idea that like, Castle and Key is its own unique water source and all the factors that go into making a distillery unique. And it'll be cool to see how it plays out, especially when their stuff starts coming out.
Which I'm assuming that should be, I would think that would be soon, because they're right on the edge of 4 years, right? Or
yeah,
over 4 years
I think
stuff. So
I think though that they're making sanitizer and they've just
right,
been thrown off course a little bit. So I don't know that we'll see anything from them until spring of next year, actually.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, I've got a bottle of their gin and a bottle of their vodka upstairs. That's the only vodka that I have in my house. So
I mean, they're doing a great job. Oh, you know what? I'm going to grab. I have the rye humor, the cask strength, which is at least the same age and the same. I mean, it's similar to the vertical.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Well, we're gonna take a quick break. So we're gonna. We lost Sean there for just a second, but hey, Sean,
Hey, we're
gonna take we hadn't taken our quick break, so we're gonna take that quick break, and then we're gonna come back on this round 3 with the special treat that you just sort of like what you just got.
Close enough. Close enough.
Sorry. So we'll get a word from our sponsor. Everybody, just hang tight with us, and we'll be back in just a second with more from Sean Joseph with Pinhook. Hold on. Have you ever been on a distillery tour or at a bourbon tasting and wondered where they got those amazing glasses? And more importantly, how you could get some of those to use in your own home? Well, we have the perfect solution for you. PremiumBarProducts.com. PremiumBarProducts.com offers the finest whiskey glasses from around the world, including Spey Tasters, Neat glasses, Tuath glasses, the Kinsey Dram, and of course, the ever-popular Glencairn. PremiumBarProducts.com offers all of these as well as cocktail glasses and bar tools direct to you, the consumer. But the coolest thing is that you can order your glasses with your own personalized engraving on them, and you don't have to order huge quantities. PremiumBarProducts.com will work with you on small quantities as well. Just think about how impressive that's going to look the next time your friends come over and you offer them a pour in one of your own personalized Glencairns. PremiumBarProducts.com is the official supplier of Glencairns for the Bourbon Life, and we wouldn't trust our glassware to anyone else, and neither should you. And if you're part of a bourbon or whiskey group looking for glassware for your members, PremiumBarProducts.com takes the hassle out of ordering. Check out PremiumBarProducts.com today. They are the go-to source for blank and custom glassware and bar tools. All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me as always is my co-host, Matt. Matt, welcome back. I'm glad you stayed around for round 3 with me this time.
Oh, I am so delighted, Mark, to be back for round 3. And as always, everyone, you have made it this far. You might as well stick around for the exciting conclusion as we wrap up with Sean Josephs, the co-founder and master taster at Pinhook Bourbon. Sean, what do we have in store for us for round 3?
So I think I can honestly say that you all are the first people to taste this.
No, are you serious?
Yeah, because I think it might have just landed in Kentucky. So it's not released. It's not on the shelves yet. I think you'll start seeing it in Kentucky.
Okay.
Maybe later this week, possibly next week. But
Wow.
As I told you guys earlier, I had a sample bottle that was sent to me, from the distillery. I drank it all. But it's not here in New Orleans yet.
Sample bottle there.
It's gone. But yeah, it's exciting. So this is the inaugural release of our Vertical Series Rye.
Okay.
And so I think some folks might be familiar, but I had this idea, which again ties to wine. So in wine, when you have a vertical, it's when, let's say there's a producer you like and you have all the vintages of a certain range from that winery. So let's just say, for argument's sake, like I have every Cabernet Sauvignon from Schaefer Hillside Select between 1996 and 2012. And the vertical is every year climbing the ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I became interested in the idea of doing something similar in whiskey, but obviously in whiskey, because it doesn't age in the bottle and it ages in the barrel, the only way to do that is to have a group of barrels that are all the same age, and then each year grab a chunk of those barrels, blend, bottle, and blend proof and bottle them, leaving the rest to continue to age. So the idea of the Vertical Series. So we released a bourbon, the first of the Bourbon Vertical Series, a 4-year-old bourbon last fall. And it's a 4-year-old bourbon. This is all of the remaining MGP barrels that we have. So, and so that's,
wow.
Sorry, I feel like I'm doing this a little bit out of order, but it should hopefully still make sense. So part of it was also solving a problem. It was, how do we take these remaining MGP barrels? I didn't like the idea of blending them with our Castle and Key distillate, but also wanted there to be some sort of clear separation between the Castle and Key Pinhook, which is, kind of the core of what we do, and then the remaining MGP barrels. So the idea of doing a limited series that is also something very specific outside of the realm of our Castle and Key distillate seemed like a great answer. And it was something that I'd always thought about and thought would be a lot of fun. So really the idea is like, how does 1 year of age affect a bourbon or a rye? What's going to happen? How different are bourbon and rye as they age? So this fall we'll release the 5-year-old Bourbon Vertical. Okay. A year from now, we'll release the 5-year-old Rye Vertical. In the spring, is that right? No, sorry. In the fall of 2027, we will release the final of the Bourbon Vertical Series, which will be a 12-year-old bourbon. In the spring of 2028, we'll release the final rye, which will be a 12-year-old rye in 2028. And so really it's this idea of following a group of barrels as they age over 9 years. And I hope that, I know that it's easy to talk about the collectability, which I think it is, because obviously in order to appreciate the whole thing, you need to buy a bottle or maybe 2 bottles each year, one to drink, one to hold. But I'm also like, I think Rhetoric did it, but that was on a very like 21 to 26 years or 25 years. To me, the idea of it too is this is the sweet spot of American whiskey, age 4 to age 12, historically, I think. 4, because a bottled in bond was always considered to be like the demarcation point of like the beginning of quality, even though I think we all agree we tasted some good younger whiskeys younger than that already tonight. But, and I think 12 was often considered the point where after that it starts to get too woody. So I feel like while I'm the one in a way like responsible, I'm like the curator of it, I'm also along for the ride because I don't know either, right? I've never done it. It's never been done. So I hope that it will lead to some pretty fascinating conversations around, maybe someone being like, honestly, I think every year after 7 was good, but there was something about 7 and it just couldn't be, it's like trying to have fun, I think, with American whiskey and like generate conversations that I hope are unique. And that's really the ethos of it. And the other thing is it's the idea of like, I'll proof them differently each year. So my hunch is that the proof wants to go up as the age goes up. Generally what I've seen is like, as you have more barrel influence, you need to ratchet up the intensity of the distillate, the alcohol, is because it gives it weight and structure to match the added notes from the wood. And in theory, it's give or take the same number of barrels each year. So the interesting thing is that each year you're going to get evaporation of 4 to 5%. Right. Plus, if the proofs keep going up, you're just going to get decreasing yields from the same number of barrels. And I should point out too that the first year, the price point is $45. And then obviously the SRPs will go up each year. Hopefully, and the idea isn't for it to become silly. Like I can't say I know exactly how much the SRPs are going to go up, but it's like maybe they go up $5 to $7 to $10. Maybe once they hit 8 or 9 years, it accelerates a little bit. But to make it something that is, relatively affordable. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. And I'm just really, it's something I'm really excited about because I had kind of thought about it for a while. And just to be clear, with the Vertical Series, though, the horse on both the bourbon and the rye, respectively, stays the same the entire time, and the portrait looks the same. So the only thing that changes on those bottles, unlike our other annual releases, on the Vertical, the only thing that will look different is the age statement. So as you guys can see, the age statement is in pretty big, big font size. And so obviously next year it'll say 5-year-old, and then it'll say, 2021 and so on and so forth. So, I don't know. I think that, I can't wait. I mean, it's the one thing that's like, bourbon is all about patience. Like, I'm just excited for like I'm just anticipating the 8 more years of conversations, because I think it's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm thinking, Matt, we might have to go ahead and put a chair out right now at the local liquor store for years 10, 11, and 12.
Yeah, that might be the tough one. Right now, I would say, so one thing that was important, so we did 150 barrels of the bourbon vertical, which that's not small. Like, for what's considered a limited release, it was like 38,000 bottles. Yeah. So that's not a teeny amount. I mean, it's teeny compared to the big guys, but I think part of the point was, I think it would have been silly if it was a 3,000 bottle release. I think the idea is like, it's affordable, and basically anyone who really likes bourbon can probably get a bottle of it. Right.
Sure.
And the rye, unfortunately, well, maybe it works out. We only have 1/3 the amount of rye barrels as we have bourbon. So the rye is roughly 50 barrels a year. So this was only a third. This was about 1/3 of the production. So, a lot less of it will be out there. But frankly, as much as we all love rye, and those of us who are enthusiasts, some of us even prefer rye, if you look at it from a national sales perspective, bourbon is king by far, and probably outsells rye, 3 to 4 to 1, something like that. Sure. So, so maybe it's appropriate there's only 1/3 amount of the rye. But
so Matt, going back to this one, what are you picking up on this one? The Tiz Rye Time.
Tiz Rye Time. I'm getting like little citrus fruit on the nose, and I got something herbal as well. I don't want to say, especially after having the Rye'd On, where I had so much herbs and so much dill, especially, but I get something herbal on the nose, and then the taste on this is so minty, spearmint. It's so minty. I love that. Absolutely love the spearmint taste, and it's just this drinks really well.
Yeah, I'm excited about thinking about this one at 12 years old, 10 years old.
Yeah. What's cool to me about this one is, like, I think what I love about it is I would be happy to pour anyone this rye, right? Like, if you're just like sitting at my house and you're like, let's drink some whiskey, I'd be happy to pour this in your glass and be like, hey, this is a tasty whiskey. But I also love thinking that this is the baseline.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like, all the things we were saying aside about young whiskey, in theory, it should only get more intense, more complex from here. And so this is like the entry point. And I think it's a cool entry point, right? Because, and to be honest, I don't know if I was really being objective, I would say, like, it's a really tasty rye. I don't know that I would be like, I have to like hoard these bottles,
Right.
Like, it's just, to me, it's just like, it's a 97 proof, very tasty rye whiskey. I mean, I do think it's showing a lot of complexity for its age. I mean, you were talking about, to me, it's like, it's mint, it's eucalyptusy. Again, I'm unfortunately or fortunately sitting with the cask strength that we did from MGP, which is actually a similar age to this, but at 114 proof. So I think some of the flavors come across, but it's definitely some dried fruit, and it's starting to get a little bit of that like tobacco-y, earthy. It's got that kind of classic rye licorice, like that candy black licorice, particularly in the finish. But I think it's like, I think what would be interesting too, and my fault for not setting you up with it, but it's a pretty good example. If you taste the 4-year-old bourbon, from our Vertical series, the 4-year-old bourbon is very tasty. It's not nearly as complex as this, right? And so it's that classic thing about how rye drinks better young, and then people will often say that rye gets a little awkward in middle age, but then goes the distance better than bourbon. So I'm kind of fascinated by all of those comparisons between how's the rye aging compared to the bourbon. So not only like, how did you like the 5-year-old rye compared to the 6-year-old rye, but how did you like the 6-year-old rye compared to the 6-year-old bourbon? And that whole narrative and conversation, I think, should be, I think it's going to be really fun. I'm looking forward to it, like I said.
Yeah, man. I think that's a great idea. I love it. And I noticed this is 97 proof too. So this was the sweet spot on this one for you guys on the proofing.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I almost was like, oh man, not 97 again, but maybe I'm going to learn that that's a good proof for rye. I have no idea. It's a work in progress. I will say this though. I call this my public service announcement. When I had my bourbon restaurant, Elijah Craig 18 was $35 wholesale. And I could have ordered 500 6-packs from my distributor, right? Like at the time. And they would have just been like, oh, sure thing. We'll send it for tomorrow. My cost would have been like $105,000 to buy that. And the current value of it would be $2 million. Right. And so my thing, and this is why I call this my public service announcement. This isn't all right. I guess it is like a Pinhook promotion, but my point is, what I've noticed in the whiskey industry, people only notice the stuff that already happened, not the stuff that's happening.
Right.
Right? So like, I need the Blantons. Where's the Blanton? Like, and it's like, well, that already happened. Like there was a time where you could have like filled your basement with Blantons. So what you should be thinking about are the cool things that you see, then hopefully that you like as well, but that also you understand based on what happened from, let's say, 2010, 11, when things really started to pop, to like 2020. And then what's going to happen moving forward. I predict that a fully unopened, 9-year vertical series of bourbon, Pinhook Bourbon or Pinhook Rye, will be worth some sort of unfortunate amount of money. That would be my guess. And so I would just say, like, right now, it's like, if you have fun collecting and you're kind of interested in where things are going, this is a pretty low cost, opportunity to jump in before, it goes in some sort of crazy direction.
So everybody take note and pay attention and pick up your bottle of Tiz Rye Time.
You got to pick up two.
I told you.
You got to have one to drink and one to bunker.
One to drink and one to bunker. That's exactly right. Yeah. But we can come back. This is a good thing about podcasts, right? It'll be like a time capsule, and we can come back, and maybe it'll be worth less than you paid for it. And I'll be wrong. I doubt it, because I think it's just going to keep getting more fun. And the yield will keep decreasing, obviously, as we discussed. So that'll be interesting as well.
Yeah, to see how many bottles you're able to get out of the blend once you get to that 10, 11, 12-year-old bottlings, to see how many you're going to actually have. So I think it's a great idea. And this rye is like Matt said, that spearmint, the mintiness. I told you earlier, man, I love that mintiness. I'm picking up, I get the typical with the rye spice, but it's not as I don't want to say harsh, but it's not like a 95.5 rye, where I don't know what is the mash bill before I say that.
95.5.
It is 95.5.
Yeah, so this is the MGP 95.5. Which again is, I think it's like, what I always love, and it's why I'm transparent too, is like, I'll tell someone all day long, it's like, okay, look, this is same stuff. Well, I mean, High West is now distilling, I think, at Bardstown Bourbon Company, but like, this High West is MGP, Bullet Rye is MGP, James E. Pepper's MGP, Templeton's MGP, and so on and so forth. Smooth Ambler, all sorts of folks. And I think it's the cool thing that speaks to the whole point of blending and proofing, that a bunch of people can essentially get the same ingredients and produce something extremely different out of literally the exact same stuff made in the same place. And then, of course, there are variables afterwards in terms of what rick houses people put them in, and then how they choose to blend, and the proof they pick, and all that kind of stuff. But I think there have been a lot of people that have tasted our 95.5 and said, like, oh, wow, your guys' stuff tastes different. And there's nothing. And sorry to interrupt.
No. I was just going to say, you're right. Last week, Mike kind of pulled a fast one on us and gave us
threw us a curveball.
A sample of one of his rye barrels, and Matt and I were like, "Yeah, this is it's higher proof, and it's you can pick up some of those bourbon notes. And then Matt started asking me questions, and then I'm looking, I took another taste, and I'm like, this isn't a bourbon at all. This is a rye, right? And Mike's just dying laughing. He goes, yeah, it's another rye. But it's funny. Yeah. So before I got into that and saying, oh, this isn't really spicy like a high rye, it's like, this is 95.5, but man, there's a sweetness to this.
I think really yeah. And I think it does go back to the blending, right? Which is that idea of like, I think that because a lot of people are blending to a profile, not only are they blending to their profile, but they're blending to this idea of what the expectation of rye is, rather than saying, again, what if you just took these rye barrels and just tried to make the tastiest thing you could? Because I'm not looking for anything other than those sort of parameters that I described before around like complexity and balance and like the finish and alcohol integration, right? I'm not saying like, oh, let me see if I can get this out of them. I'm looking for that overarching, those kind of benchmarks. And this is what comes out of it on its own, right? It's already in there. I didn't add anything, right? It's already in there. And it's simply which barrels you put together and at what proof you bottle.
Yeah. Yeah. I really enjoy this. This is a great, and I'm really surprised. I'm just surprised at the fact that it's a 95.5 and it's not like that typical spicy rye, man. I mean, it's got a great blend of flavors to it, and really enjoy that. So, Sean, we're actually getting close to the end of our third round already, but I was going to ask you before we wrap stuff up, what's going on? What's coming up for you? What's coming up for Pinhook? What can everybody look for?
Well, I think, in a way, not that we're always trying to look to do interesting things and push forward, but I also think we've had a lot to navigate in terms of, the company was founded in 2010. We bought our first 20 barrels in 2011. We did our first release in 2014. We had a different bottle shape back then. We were only doing bourbon. Each release had a different wax color. Then we decided to expand a bit, and then we had to create designated wax colors for each expression. Then we got the Castle and Key thing going. There's already a new horse every year. We added the Vertical Series. We have a lot of moving parts. So I almost think this is a good moment to kind of settle in. And honestly, I'd say, short term, what am I most excited about? So what we call our flagship, our everyday drinking bourbon version of Bohemian will be ready for our distributors to grab in early August.
Okay.
So when people are looking for that $37, so essentially the mid 90s proof version of the high proof that you all tasted will come out in, I guess summer/fall. So that will kind of be, so the vertical is, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, you'll kind of see it. We're distributed in 25 states, and you'll see it around all those markets in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then, for us, that'll be a big moment. Bohemian Bourbon is a limited release. The flagship is ostensibly something that, even though it's, there's a finite amount, it's meant to be available essentially for 12 months. It's always, meant to always be on the shelf. And so that'll be that's a big moment for us as well. And then next year will be exciting too, because I'm hoping that we'll push everything closer to 4 years across the board in terms of the high proof bourbon and rye and the everyday bourbon and rye. And then next year this year we're still doing our single barrels. We only do single barrels as store picks. We don't do actual Pinhook single barrels. So this year they're still MGP, but next year when we're getting north of 4 years old, we'll start doing Castle and Key single barrels. So so I'm sure we could experiment and do all sorts of different stuff, but as it is, I think we have a lot that we have to get people kind of accustomed to. And I feel really fortunate. And again, thank you guys for all the kind words about our Castle and Key distillate, because that was a pretty big leap. And just the fact that we've gotten a pretty good reception on it in the last couple months, what if everyone had just been like, wow, this stuff is awful, and I wish they had kept sourcing from MGP. So, that was already a pretty big shift in getting people used to, and you guys were talking about different vintages. This year we have to navigate new vintages that are also new source, or in this contract. Mm-hmm. So if people were used to the MGP flavor profile, all of a sudden we're switching them to a different distillery. So it's kind of
now all of a sudden it's your distillate at Castle and Key that's coming out under the Pinhook name.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a lot without being like, oh, and now we have this fun new experimental series, or it's like I think we've asked people to absorb a lot in the last like year and a half. So kind of let it all sink in a bit in the next year.
Yeah. Well, man, Sean, we appreciate you being on the show, and we definitely appreciate being some of the first ones to get to try that Tiz Rye Time. And that is, I'm slowly becoming more of a rye drinker. It's kind of funny, man. So, and that is really good. That's one I'm going to definitely go out and pick up a bottle just to hold back, because I think it's going to be a great idea, because I can see myself easily drinking this bottle. And like you said, this is something I would pour like your own distillate. The Castle and Key rye, and both of those are ones that I would easily pour and share with other people, man, because they're both really, really good stuff. And
thank you.
Bunker a bottle just to have back. But so before we wrap this up and I'll give 2 thumbs up on this one, on Tiz Rye Time, because I really enjoyed it. I love the mintiness in the rye. I love the sweetness on this one too. I just can't get over the sweetness, the sweet flavor on this one. It's kind of crazy. But Matt, what about you, man?
Absolutely. I love the mint that came forward in this one. Is one of my favorite flavors, especially to come forward in a rye. And there was a little bit of pepper, a little bit of spice to it. It wasn't overpowering.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really great. And the story behind the vertical with this, what a special treat for us to be able to taste just the beginning of this experiment and see where it's going. I think it's going to be something really fun to follow. And you've really got a cool idea and a cool experiment going on there.
Thank you.
The Rye'd On, I'm just telling you right now, when social distancing orders are lifted and we can go barbecue this summer, that is coming with me to every barbecue. And I am going to turn a lot of heads with that rye, because that's something else. I thought it was really, really great. I'm excited to share that. And I think for your flagship coming out as your rye, that is a great way to start people. That's so Thank good. You. And at the price point, that's a really great rye. I'm hooked.
You're pinhooked.
Look at this guy.
Thank you, guys. And hopefully, look, we get on the other side of this thing. I actually, I travel all around the country, but I'm in Lexington, more than anywhere else. And we can all hang out at the Stave. And I'm actually normally I would have been headed that way to do the blending for the 5-year vertical bourbon. So I had to do the blending for the flagship bourbon from home. Which was fine, but way more fun to be at that.
Yeah. Well, Sean, definitely, man, when you get in town, let us know, because we would love to get together and bring one of those kick-ass hats that you're wearing with you, man.
I can make that happen.
I'm all about the hats, dude. And I've been admiring that hat for the last hour and a half, checking it out. Like that's a sweet hat.
Easy.
Man.
That's the easiest request of the day. No problem.
Love that. All right. Well, before we wrap it up, I do have to thank our sponsors, the Stave Restaurant, which we just mentioned, and you will probably be able to find myself, Matt, and Shauna out there at some point, hopefully enjoying some of the delicious food from Chef Jonathan. Rebecca and her husband own it out there in Millville, and it's just about a mile and a half actually from Castle and Key. So they are very close by, but we love what they're doing, and they have opened back up. They're at 30% indoor capacity. They've got their outdoor deck opened up as well.
Nice.
So they're serving some great food. And then also Premium Bar Products, our new sponsor. They got great glassware, whatever you're looking for. Glencairns, which is what we usually drink out of, but they have tons of other stuff, but they have it direct to the consumer. So you can get personalized glassware, barware, check them out, premiumbarbproducts.com, for some great stuff that they've got. So before we head out of here, guys, anything else to wrap it up, Matt?
I just want to thank all of our listeners and supporters from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you all for the support. If you like what you've been hearing, give us a review, 5-star, 1-star, whatever. We'd love to hear any critiques, criticism, and of course, any kind words we'd love to hear as well. And please reach out and get in touch with us if there are any questions you want us to answer on the programs, or anyone you want us to talk to, or anything like that. And Sean, thank you so much for taking the time out to spend an evening with us at the Bourbon Life.
It was my pleasure. Thank you guys so much. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. We really appreciate it. Thanks for putting up again technical difficulties, man. We just seem to be full of them here on the Bourbon Life Podcast, on this remote COVID-19 podcasting. So, but with that said, we appreciate everybody listening and hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And I'll wrap it up with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the Bourbon Life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the Bourbon Life.